Hey, Jack.
Hey, Trevor.
Welcome back to another episode of Hey, Jack, Leadership Reflections with Jack Nalig. Jack, today I want to get your thoughts here on a really interesting topic that I think a lot of leaders probably wrestle with at some point, or maybe it's an ongoing challenge that they face. And that is around this concept of feedback, but more specifically, feedback that lands. A lot of time when we give feedback, uh, you know, it can discourage people. There's just that natural tendency, I think, as humans, when we get feedback, we kind of, we can clench up a little bit and feel like we're being discouraged or we're doing something wrong. One of the things I've always admired and respected about you is that, you're a very positive leader in general. And, that energy boiled over to your other leadership team. And, I personally took a lot away from the idea that whenever I would get feedback from somebody on the leadership team or yourself, I walked away motivated. But unfortunately, that's not the case in many organizations. So, what's the secret sauce there, Jack? How can we give feedback that actually lands and motivates instead of discourages?
Okay, this is a fun one. And feedback, there are feedback templates out there which are really good, and that's what you can research to get in-depth, critique on how to give feedback. But if I reflect on my career in the last 20 specifically, I was told at one point, maybe 10, 15 years into it, from a middle manager who I respected highly, of course, that the team loved and hated my feedback sessions. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I was also known for in the company, one of the things I was known for in the company, if I had a piece of feedback to give somebody, I didn't necessarily go to their boss and have their boss tell them. I would just go right to them. But then the downside of that, and I knew there was a downside of that, is then they immediately afterward, they would run to your boss and say, oh no, Jack called me and said this, this, and this, and I need to do a little better here, or I could help. And am I in trouble? So I had to adapt the way I delivered feedback so that it landed properly as well in my career, especially because if you're doing skip level feedback, right? If you're doing it below. Now, anytime there was a bad situation where the person was misbehaving, I immediately would go to their manager and never go to them. When I would skip level and go to people, it was all positive, trying to make them better kind of feedback, right? So that's the difference. So let's just assume the feedback that lands has to do with maybe difficult behavior, maybe someone that needs to fix something, maybe a detractor, and that the person will possibly feel like they're in trouble, even though they're not, right? Meaning that it's a negative on them, that they have to change something. So let's assume that's why we're delivering feedback. And the first and foremost rule in doing all this feedback is it should be in private, right? Just head on and in private, face to face in private. And yes, you can do it like this with a screen, but the best, of course, is just sitting down in a conference room chatting.
Chatting.
Okay. So head on in private is the number one rule. You don't want to ever do it in public where someone can hear you telling someone to do something different, right? And then I always, and now we're going to assume here it's a difficult situation. So sort of a bad behavior, but not even the person knows it's a bad behavior, but it's a behavior that's causing bad stuff, right? So the person's not trying to be bad, but they're stuck in a habit that is bad. So I always use the feedback template of, you tell them, first of all, what you saw, what it was, what was the specific thing that happened. You then tell them how it makes you feel seeing it or hearing it, or what you think their team feels if this is a leader talking to a team in a strange way. So you tell them, I'm sure your team believes you meant this, this, and this, even though you said this, this, and this. So you describe how you think people are reacting to it, or you personally are reacting to it. And then the third step is you recommend a change in action by saying what you think they should do instead. Always the instead. And that's a lot of times people skip that step and they just tell them, here's what you did. And then your people think it sucks, or I think it sucks. It's really bad. And you just say, go fix it. As opposed to recommending ways to approach it or different ways to say it, right? And that third step is so important because in a weird way, it just shows you care. And if you want feedback to stick or land, if you deliver it so that you care, or if they feel like you care and you should care, then that raises the stick rate that they're going to actually do something about it, because they believe they're doing it. You're doing it to help them as opposed to you're doing it to criticize them. So, and then probably the last thing after you do those three pieces, my closer was almost always, but always, that I was committed to be there to help them if they wanted more help. And I would always say, are you okay with this feedback? Do you want more of it? And then they usually would say, yes, please, let me help.
Yeah.
So I was saying, look, I'm committed to helping you more on this topic. And then the last thing is I would end with, I have confidence in them that they can change, that I believe they can do it. So that's my template, if you will, on how I approached feedback.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty small topic, if you will, in one way, but it's a pretty big topic in others. And I think leaders need to realize it is their job to help people under them or managers under them by giving them feedback. The lack of feedback is not a good thing if you're trying to develop somebody. So it is a key responsibility, even though a pretty precise topic on how you should handle it. And that's about what comes to mind for me on having feedback that lands.
Yeah, and from my experience in general, that's spot on. And one thing I'll add, communication goes a long way in this with a team. And I think the more open communication you have with the team, there won't be as big of a surprise in the sense if you have to talk with them about something like this. But I think the underlying takeaway here that I took from this and I experienced in all of this is that we're on the same team, right? And you're encouraging me, believing in me. You're not scolding me. You're not telling me this is the only way to do it. You're walking through what you saw, how it made you feel. You're walking through some alternative options, and then you're also encouraging to the point where I'm not going to leave that room and feel like I got, in trouble today, or I did something I shouldn't have. And it's really hard because everybody does interpret a lot of this differently.
Yeah.
I will say from my experience firsthand, uh, you used to give me a lot of feedback, but you did it in the form of calling me up. And I appreciated that. And the feedback, though, I didn't realize this until years later, that the feedback came in the form of you just understanding things that I was working on. Because at the time, the areas I was working on were entirely new in the digital era, and you didn't have as much exposure, and you were just trying to learn as well. But then you were able to give me some ideas or perspectives that I wasn't even thinking about, of cautionary tales of how to, hey, maybe you want to update this team on this. That way they can be aware of this strategy as well. And then you always did end it with like, I love it. I'm on board with this. Let me know if I can do anything to help you with it. And I always appreciated that. And that to me was the difference of, let's just say the meeting pops on the calendar, the phone rings, they see a name. How you feel when that name shows up or that email comes through, like that should set the tone, and when your name will pop up, I was always happy to answer it. I never felt like I'm going to get screamed at here. I'm going to get, I'm going to leave this call in a bad mood. And I think that says a lot. So I appreciate this framework. I do think it's very helpful. And again, feedback is not easy to give. It's something I struggled with. I still probably do struggle with it. And
I just think so. You do
having
it
these
pretty well.
templates is good though. It's good guidance to have. I'll put you on the spot here. If somebody is looking for additional feedback templates, is there a common resource for something like that? Is it just kind of Google it? Any
Yeah,
tips to
to
look out
me,
for? Or anything like that?
yeah, I don't have any real specific advice there. I think it's a straight up Google, read a cut. Yeah, like I said, it's a pretty narrow topic on how to give feedback, and it's pretty well documented. So they'll probably do a better job than I. Just rattled that template off. It's just how I remember it. And it's just one of these things that once you get doing it, once you've done it 5 or 10 times,
Yeah.
then you feel comfortable doing it. You're never gonna feel totally comfortable because you're never gonna know how they're gonna react.
Yeah.
And maybe 1 out of 10, the individual reacts badly, meaning they receive it badly. So it's like when you're in sales, you get 10 no's before you get a yes, right? This is the opposite. You'll get 8 or 9 people that'll really appreciate the feedback, and then 1 person won't, and then you got to work through that. But it's something that is so often people have to do. It's very well documented by psychologists on how to give proper feedback. So
Awesome. Appreciate that. And I appreciate Jack sharing those reflections and insights. And I think that's going to help a lot of our listeners here. So with that said, thank you, Jack. And we'll catch all you guys on the next episode.
you bet. Take care. Go lead, everybody.